She came for a job. She found 5 children no one had warned her about, a man who could not look his own daughter in the eye, and a house that smelled like 16 months of giving up. She almost left. She got as far as the porch steps with her bag in her hand and $11.20 to her name. Standing in the New Mexico afternoon heat with nothing behind her and nothing much ahead. And then a 5-year-old girl with bare feet and cold hands walked out the front door and did not cry, did not beg, just looked up at her and said 3 words, "Are you going?" Not a question. The way a child asks something when they already know the answer has happened before, when leaving is so familiar it does not even surprise them anymore. Willa Bassett set her bag down. That was how it started. Not with courage, not with any particular plan. Just a small girl with cold hands and the particular weight of a grip that did not ask for anything and somehow asked for everything. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because before the porch and before the child and before any of it, there was Ohio. Millbrook. Ohio was the kind of town that had decided long ago what it thought about things and saw no reason to revisit those opinions. It had decided what a school teacher should look like. It had decided what a widow was worth. And it had decided, with the particular cruelty of small places that never examine themselves, exactly what it thought about Willa Bassett. She had been large her whole life, not soft large, not the kind that apologizes for itself, but broad and solid, with shoulders built for work and hands that had never been delicate and a presence that entered a room before the rest of her did. She had learned early that the world was going to have opinions about this, and that she could spend her life managing those opinions, or she could simply go about her business and let people think whatever they were going to think, regardless. She had chosen the second option. It had not made her popular. Her husband, Edmund Bassett, had died in the Carver mine collapse in the spring of 1879. He had been a quiet man who fixed things and did not complain, and had loved her without reservation, which she had understood was rare and had not taken for granted. When he died, she grieved him properly, and then she got up and started figuring out what came next, because that was what you did when there was nothing else to do. What came next, as it turned out, was very little. The savings were thin. The house was rented. She had applied for the teaching position at Millbrook Grammar School 3 weeks after the funeral because she had 2 years of normal school training and was better qualified than either of the other candidates. The school board had deliberated for 4 days and then sent her a letter. She still knew the relevant sentence by heart. The board has determined that the position requires an individual whose presentation reflects the values and image the school community wishes to project. She had read it twice. Then she had folded it and put it in the stove and watched it burn and gone back to trying to figure out what came next. What came next was 2 more years of taking in mending and keeping accounts for the hardware store, and watching the walls of her rented house get closer and the winters get longer and the options get fewer. She was 28 years old, and she felt like someone who had already used up most of her allotted luck and was now working through the remainder with careful, diminishing attention. The advertisement appeared in the Columbus Courier on a Tuesday in March of 1882. Housekeeper needed, permanent position, wages and board included, New Mexico Territory, reply to C, Granger, Clearwater Bend. She had written that same afternoon. The correspondence that followed was brief, 3 letters total, each one short and functional. The letters of a man who considered writing a necessary inconvenience. C. Granger confirmed the wages, confirmed the accommodations, confirmed the position was available immediately. He did not describe the work beyond the word considerable. He did not describe the household at all. She had not asked. Maybe that was her first mistake. Maybe it was not a mistake at all, because if she had asked and he had told her the truth, she would not have come, and then 5 children would still be in the places she found them when she arrived. which were not good places for children to be. She bought a ticket west with the last of her careful, diminishing money, and packed everything she owned into one bag and one trunk, and stood on the Millbrook station platform on the second morning of April, and did not look back. She met Rosie Hatch on the train somewhere in Missouri. Rosie was 34 years old, traveling east from Albuquerque with the careful stillness of someone who had recently had enough of something. She had the look of a woman who answered questions directly and did not volunteer comfort she did not feel, which Willa recognized and respected. They were 4 hours into Kansas before Rosie asked where she was headed. Clearwater Bend, Willa said. New Mexico territory. Rosie went quiet in a specific way, the quiet of a person who knows something and is deciding whether it is their business to say it. What is it? Willa said. I spent 3 days at a ranch outside Clearwater Bend last month, Rosie said. Housekeeper position. She looked at the window and the flat Kansas landscape moving past it. 5 children, the youngest barely walking. The house had not been properly managed in over a year, and the man, she stopped. He is not a bad man, he is just, she looked for the word, gone. Sitting right there at the table and gone. Willa listened. I am telling you because I wish someone had told me, Rosie said, not to discourage you, just so you know what you are walking into. The train passed through a small station without stopping. Willa looked at the platform going by outside the window and thought about her $11.20 and the ticket she had already bought and the fact that Ohio was now several hundred miles behind her. She did not get off at the next station. She did not get off at the one after that. She sat with what Rosie had told her and looked at the window and watched the landscape change from flat to rocky to the particular dry enormity of the territory, and she kept going. Clearwater Bend was not much of a town. It had a railroad stop, a general store, a livery stable, a bank with a freshly painted sign that said, First Territorial Bank of Clearwater Bend, a saloon, a barber shop, and a post office that also appeared to function as a telegraph office and possibly a dentist. The buildings sat along a single main street as if they had been dropped there from a height and had not quite arranged themselves into any particular intention. She climbed down from the stage that had brought her the final 12 miles from the rail stop and stood in the street with her bag and waited for her trunk to come down from the roof. 2 men were sitting in front of the barber shop. She heard one of them before she was fully standing. Colt Granger calls that a housekeeper. The other one laughed. She had heard versions of this her whole life, the public accounting of her body as though it were communal property available for comment. She had long ago stopped reacting the way they expected. She did not flush. She did not look at them. She picked up her bag when her trunk arrived and walked toward the general store to ask about a ride out to the Granger Ranch. The woman behind the counter of Sutton's general store was somewhere in her 50s, compact and direct, with the look of someone who had been watching this town for decades and had formed opinions she no longer bothered to hide. The sign above the door read, Myrta Sutton, proprietor. Myrta was looking at the 2 men in front of the barber shop when Willa came in. She did not stop looking at them until they found reasons to study their boots, and the conversation died. Then she looked at Willa. You are the new girl out at Granger's, she said. Housekeeper, Willa said. I am looking for a ride out to the ranch. My boy can take you. Myrta assessed her with the efficiency of someone who assessed things for a living. 4 women before you. One did not even go inside. Sat in the wagon at the gate for 2 minutes and told my boy to turn around. Willa considered this. That is useful to know. Myrta looked at her for another moment. Then she nodded in the manner of someone who has decided something and moved on. The ride out to the Granger Ranch took 40 minutes in a flatbed wagon, behind a mule that had no interest in hurrying. The land opened up as they moved away from town, wide and dry and cut through by a creek line, marked by cottonwood trees gone pale gold in the April light. The mountains to the west were still carrying snow on their upper reaches. The sky pressed down enormous and blue and entirely indifferent to whatever was happening underneath it. The ranch came into view over a low rise. 1,200 acres, Myrta had said. Good land, the kind of land that rewarded attention and punished neglect in equal measure. The house was being punished. It was a solid structure, 2 stories, ganai wood frame, built by someone who had known what they were doing, but it had the particular look of a place where attention had been withheld for long enough that the absence had become its own presence. Paint lifting from the siding in long curls, a shutter hanging wrong on an upper window, the yard between the house and the barn full of things left where they fell, a broken wagon wheel, a rusted cultivator blade, a child's wooden horse half buried in the dust. The barn was in better shape than the house. She noted this. It told her something about where the man's remaining attention was going, and she did not judge him for it, but she noted it. Myrta's son pulled the wagon up to the front gate and did not offer to help with her bag. She took it herself and climbed down and stood in the yard and looked at the house. The front door opened. Colt Granger was tall, taller than she'd expected, with dark hair that needed cutting and the kind of face that came from years of outdoor work and not enough sleep. He was wearing canvas trousers and a collarless work shirt that was clean but had been slept in at some point in the recent past. He moved down the porch steps with the careful economy of a man who was rationing something. He looked at her the way you look at a problem you have been expecting, but have not figured out how to solve. "Miss Bassett," he said. Not a greeting, a confirmation, reluctant. "Mr. Granger." There was a pause in which he seemed to be hoping for a better option to appear from somewhere behind her. "You should come in," he said finally. "Get some water." She followed him up the porch steps and through the front door, and that was when she understood that Rosie Hatch had not been exaggerating. The smell reached her first. Not rot, not filth in the absolute sense, but the smell of a house where no one had been managing things. Stale air and old cooking and unwashed fabric, and the particular accumulation that happens when windows stop being opened and floors stop being swept, and every small daily act of maintenance gets deferred and then deferred again until deferral becomes the permanent condition. Then the noise. From somewhere upstairs, 2 children going at each other in the full volume manner of children who have been arguing so long they no longer remember what started it. From the far end of the hall, a rhythmic banging she could not immediately identify, and underneath all of it, thin and exhausted and persistent, the sound of a very small child who had been crying for long enough that she had forgotten what she was crying about, but was not done. Willa stopped in the front hallway and took stock. The parlor to her left had furniture that had once served a purpose and now served mostly as storage. Clothes piled on the settee, a side table crowded with objects that had no clear reason for being there together, 3 tin cups, a coil of rope, 1 boot, something that had been a bird's nest before it became a handful of dried grass and fell apart. The stairs in front of her had things on nearly every step. More clothes, newspapers in stacks, a boot jack, a collection of rocks that someone had been gathering and then stopped caring about. Colt had stopped walking. He was standing at the base of the stairs with his back to her, and she could see from the set of his shoulders that he knew exactly what she was seeing. "Mr. Granger," she said, "your letter. I know what the letter said. You wrote that the household was orderly." He turned around. His face held the expression of a man who knows he has done something wrong and has not yet decided whether to defend it or apologize for it, or simply stand there and absorb whatever comes. He looked exhausted in a way that went past tired. He looked like a man who had been running on nothing for so long that he had forgotten what having something felt like. "How many children?" she said. "5. He said it like a man placing a card on a table. "And the infant. She is 15 months. "Nell, your letter said orderly. I know what it said. He looked past her at the wall. I tried the truth first. 3 women turned me down before they finished reading. So I simplified. He had nothing to say to that. The thin crying from somewhere in the house went up in pitch and then cut off suddenly and then started again. She turned toward it without deciding to, and he moved out of her way, and she went toward the sound. Nell was in the kitchen, standing at the edge of the table with both hands gripping the wood and the particular expression of a child who has been trying to get someone's attention for a very long time. She was 15 months and small for it, with dark hair pressed damp against her forehead and a look of profound indignation that Willa understood completely. She picked her up. The baby startled and then did not, and then pressed her wet face against Willa's neck and went quiet with the sudden totality of a child who has finally found what she was looking for. Colt was in the kitchen doorway. He was looking at Nell silent against Willa's shoulder, and something moved through his face that he made no attempt to control. She needs regular feeding, Willa said. She is underweight. I have been doing what I can. Is there milk in the cold box? He went and got it. She found a tin cup on the shelf, found a clean rag, improvised. It was not ideal. It had clearly been not ideal for some time. She handed the cup to Colt and showed him the angle and went upstairs to find out what was happening. The arguing was behind the second door on the right. She knocked once. Nothing. She opened the door. 2 boys, roughly 9 and 11 years old, had reached the stage of a conflict where neither of them remembered the original cause, but both were fully committed to continuing it. The older one had stopped moving when she came in and was looking at her with the careful, measuring look of a boy who had decided that the safest position was mild suspicion of everything. The younger one had a boot held over his head in what had been a defensive posture and had forgotten to lower it. "What is your name?" she said to the older one. "Seth." "And yours?" To the younger. "Bart." "This room is going to be cleaned before supper." Seth's jaw tightened. "We do not have supper. Not usually. Pa forgets." That landed somewhere specific inside her chest. She did not let it show. "You will have supper tonight," she said. "Clean the room. Clean the—" She found the 2 older girls at the end of the hall. The older one, 13, was sitting on her bed with her knees pulled up and an expression on her face that had stopped being recent and become habitual. The look of someone who has decided that needing nothing is the safest available position and has been practicing it long enough that she no longer has to try. The younger one, 7, was on the floor drawing lines in the dust with her finger. No particular shapes, just lines. "My name is Miss Bassett," she said. "I know," the older girl said. "Pa said someone was coming." She paused. "You did not leave. Not yet." Something shifted in the older girl's face. Not hope, exactly. The preliminary of hope. The thing you feel before you allow yourself to feel hope when you are not sure it is safe. "I am Delia. This is Corny." Corny looked up from the floor. She had a gap between her front teeth and an expression of uncomplicated curiosity. "Are you going to cook supper?" "Yes." "Good." She went back to drawing lines. Pa burned the beans again. Delia said her name sharply. Corny did not look up. "It is not mean if it is true." Willa looked at the room. Delia had been fighting a losing battle against disorder for a long time. The floor swept in one corner but not the others. Clothes folded in rough stacks on the trunk. A sustained effort that had simply been insufficient to the scale of the problem. "Supper in an hour," she said. "Come down when I call." She made cornbread and fried salt pork and heated dried beans from a pot at the back of the shelf that had not yet been ruined. It was not much. It was what there was. While she cooked, she inventoried the kitchen and the root cellar, which held more than she had feared. Someone had put those stores up carefully. Adelaide Granger. She understood. the woman who had managed everything and then was not there anymore. Colt came into the kitchen while she was turning the cornbread. He stood in the doorway without a clear reason for being there, or if he had one, he had misplaced it on the way in. "I should have." He started. "Yes," she said. "I am not going to make excuses for the letter. I did not ask you to." She kept her eyes on the pan. "I am going to make supper. In the morning, I am going to look at what situation I am actually in and decide what to do about it. But I have not decided anything yet, and I want to be clear about that." "Fair enough." "And, Mr. Granger," he looked at her, "do not lie to me again. Whatever else happens here, do not lie to me again." He held her gaze for a long moment. His eyes were gray, the kind that shifted toward blue depending on the light. And underneath the tiredness and the guardedness, there was something she could only describe as honest. She did not know why she thought that. She just did. "All right," he said. Supper was not graceful. All 5 children came to the table in various states of cleanliness. Seth and Bart had made some effort at the room. She could see the evidence of hurried concealment in their expressions. Delia came down with Corny, both quiet. Blythe appeared already seated, having apparently not left the kitchen area since she came inside. Sitting in her chair with her feet tucked under her and her hands folded with the patient stillness of someone who had learned to wait without expecting much. Colt sat at the head of the table. He did not say anything when the children came in, and they did not say anything to him. They just sat. Willa brought the food to the table and served it. There was a moment where all of them looked at what was in front of them. Then Bart said, "There is cornbread." "Yes," Willa said. "We have not had cornbread in a while." "Bart," Delia said, "I am just saying." Seth cut his pork and ate without comment. Corny ate with the focused attention of someone who had learned not to take meals for granted. Blythe ate carefully and watched everything. Colt ate without tasting it. She could tell. He ate because he knew he should. "It is good," Corny said to no one in particular. Delia said her name with weight. Corny said, "What?" Then she ate more cornbread. After supper, Willa put Blythe to bed. The little girl allowed herself to be guided upstairs with her hand in Willa's and showed her the small room she slept in at the back of the hall. Nell's small bed was in there too. Nell already sleeping in the exhausted way of a child who has worn herself out with crying. "My mama used to tell me a story," Blythe said when she was settled. Willa sat on the edge of the bed. "What kind of story?" "I do not remember what kind." She was quiet for a moment. "She has been gone a long time." "I know." "Do you know stories?" "I know a few." "Tell me one." So Willa told her the one her own mother had told her when she was small, the one about the winter bird who could not fly and had to walk all the way south on foot, and all the things she saw and the arguments she had with other animals along the way. It was not a dramatic story. She had always loved it for exactly that reason. Blythe was asleep before the bird reached the mountain pass. Willa sat there a moment longer than she needed to. She found Colt on the porch when she came back downstairs. He was sitting with his forearms on his knees and a cup of coffee gone cold, looking out at the dark ranch. She sat in the other chair without asking. For a while, neither of them said anything. "How long ago?" she said. He did not pretend not to know what she was asking. 16 months, February of last year. Typhoid fever. It came on fast. "Were you here?" "I was in Albuquerque. Stock auction." He was quiet. "I got back 3 days after." She heard what lived inside those 3 days. The fact that he had been gone and come back to something already finished. Already irreversible. She did not say anything about it. Some grief does not need commentary. "Delia has been the one." He started. "I know. She is 13 years old, and she has been trying to run this house." "I know." He pressed both hands flat on his knees and looked at the darkness beyond the yard. "Adelaide was better at all of it than I ever was. Not just the house, the accounts, the arrangements with other ranchers, the land office filings. I know cattle and I know this land. She knew everything else. And when she died, I did not just lose my wife. I lost the person who knew how everything worked. They sat with that for a while. I am going to stay, Willa said. He went still. Not because of the letter, and not because I think you have earned it. You lied to get me here, and that is not something I intend to pretend did not happen. She looked at the stars, more of them than she had ever seen in Ohio, more than she had imagined were possible. I am staying because that little girl took my hand, and because Delia is 13 years old, and she is too tired, and because Nell needs someone who knows what they are doing. She paused. And because I need somewhere to be. That is honest, and I am telling you because I said I would not be lied to, and I am not going to be the one doing the lying either. Colt was quiet for a long time. What do you need? He said finally. I need to know everything about this ranch, the accounts, what has been managed and what has been let go. I need to see the books if there are books, and I need to understand what I am dealing with before I can do anything useful about it. I will tell you whatever you need, and the house is mine to run. Not suggestions about how Adelaide did it. Mine. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved in the direction of something that was not quite a smile, but was working toward one. Yes, ma'am, he said, in a tone so close to Seth's that she had to work to keep her face even. She stood up. I will start a proper inventory in the morning. She went inside. The room at the end of the hall had a bed and a washstand and a window that latched, and she sat on the edge of the mattress and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and listened to the ranch settle into its nighttime sounds. She thought about the word orderly. She thought about what she had imagined it meant when she was sitting in Millbrook reading that advertisement by the light of a lamp that needed new oil. She thought about Blythe's cold hands and the grip that had not asked for anything and somehow asked for everything. She was $11.20 short of where she had started. She was in a room in a state she had never been to before, in a house that had not been properly cleaned in 16 months, 4 miles from a town where men felt comfortable making public observations about her body before she had set her bag down. None of that was fixed. None of it was close to fixed. But she lay down on top of the quilt with her clothes on, because she was too tired to do anything else, and she looked at the ceiling in the dark, and she thought about a small girl with bare feet and cold hands, and the question that was not really a question, "Are you going?" She was already asleep before she finished the thought. She was up before anyone else. The woman who rises first sets the tone for the whole day. The tone of this house needed serious resetting, and she was the one who was going to do it. She swept the kitchen floor. She washed the dishes in the dry sink using water she heated on the range. She found a tablecloth in the back of a drawer, faded and burned at one corner, and put it on the table anyway, because a table with a cloth on it feels different from a table without one. Small things. It is always the small things that hold a house together. She fixed the range. The firebox had been loaded wrong for months, which was why the heat was uneven, which was why everything Colt tried to cook burned on one side and went raw on the other. She cleaned out the ash box, relayed the fire, adjusted the damper. Basic. The kind of thing that goes wrong when no one is paying attention and stays wrong indefinitely. Nell woke at first light, which Willa heard through the ceiling as a low murmur building toward something more serious, and she went up before it woke Blythe. The baby looked at her in the gray morning light with an expression of careful assessment, deciding whether yesterday had been a single event or the beginning of a pattern. It is not a single event, Willa told her, settling her on one hip and heading back down to warm the milk. You are going to have to get used to me. Nell grabbed a fistful of her collar and held on, which Willa decided to take as a reasonable response. Colt came down while she was feeding the baby. He had shaved and missed a spot near his jaw, and his hair was still damp. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the swept floor and the clean counter and the tablecloth, and something moved through his face that he covered before it became fully readable. "Coffee is on," she said without looking up from Nell. He poured a cup and stood by the window looking out at the barn. "I need to be out by sunup. Fence line in the north section. Fine. I will be back by midday. Maybe after. Fine." He drank his coffee. She adjusted Nell's angle and the baby made a sound of satisfaction. "She is getting more than she was," and he said. "She needs regular small amounts and she needs to be held more. Babies this age need contact." She met his eyes briefly across the kitchen. "That is separate from everything else. That is just what she needs." He did not argue. He finished his coffee, set the cup in the dry sink, and went out. She noted the cup in the dry sink. It was a small thing. It was also new. The first week was hard in the accumulated way of 100 small things rather than any one large thing. The laundry alone took 2 full days. She boiled water in the big copper kettle out back and worked through it systematically, and Blythe followed behind her, handing up clothespins with earnest efficiency. And by the end of the second day, the lines were full, and the yard smelled like clean cotton, and something in the house began to shift in the manner that houses shift when someone starts paying attention to them again. She took the children back to school on the 4th day. This required a conversation with Colt, who had been planning to wait until fall, and another conversation with Delia, who pointed out with careful precision that she did not have shoes that fit anymore. They made a trip to town. Willa managed it with Colt's money and her own judgment and came back with shoes and 2 bolts of practical cotton. And the look on Seth's face when he realized he was also getting new boots was something she filed away for later. In Clearwater Bend, she bought what she needed from Murda Sutton's store, and she learned, from the particular quality of the way people looked at her, the texture of the town's relationship with the Granger Ranch. Not hostile, careful, the careful of people who have opinions they are weighing against the uncertainty of who they are talking to. Murda waited until the other customers had gone. "You need to know something about this ranch," she said. She set her hands flat on the counter the way a person does when they are about to say something they have been deciding whether to say. "Harlan Voss." She nodded at the bank building visible through the store window, its fresh painted sign catching the light. Last year, Colt borrowed $4,200 from Voss to buy the north section, 300 acres with the creek running through it. Good land. Adelaide picked it out. The loan terms on the surface looked reasonable. Willa waited. The terms underneath were not. There is language in that contract that lets Voss call the full amount due early if he can demonstrate the ranch is being mismanaged. Adelaide knew about it. She had noted it. But she was the one keeping the books, and she figured as long as she was keeping them, there was nothing for Voss to point at. And then she died? How long until the next payment? 7 weeks. Voss has been asking around town about the ranch since about a month after Adelaide passed. Asking people what they have seen, how the children look, whether the fences are maintained. Willa stood in the general store and looked at the bank building through the window and thought about a man who had started gathering information 1 month after a woman died. A woman who had been the only thing standing between him and what he wanted. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me yet," Murda said. "Wait and see if it is actually useful." On the way back to the ranch, Willa sat in the wagon with the supplies and the children and thought about Adelaide Granger's account books and whether they had been moved or were still where Adelaide had left them and whether anyone had opened them in the past 16 months. The children rode in the wagon bed in the spring afternoon light, Bart reporting his observations about the cloud formations to anyone willing to listen, Corny arguing with his conclusions, Seth reading with the book held up against the motion, Delia sitting with Nell in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance. Blythe sat next to Willa on the wagon bench and did not say anything, and after a while she put her small hand on Willa's arm, not asking for anything, just placing it there. Willa kept her eyes on the road and let the hand stay where it was. The ranch came into view over the low rise. The yard was cleaner now than it had been. The windows had been opened. The laundry lines still held the last of the washing, white against the afternoon blue. It looked like a place someone was paying attention to. She was going to need to find Adelaide's account books. She found them on a Wednesday evening 3 weeks after she arrived, when the children were in bed and Colt was still out checking the south fence line, and the house was quiet enough that she could hear the wind moving through the cottonwoods along the creek. She had known the room was there. She had walked past the closed door at the end of the downstairs hall a dozen times and had not gone in, the way you do not open a door that belongs to someone else, even when that person is gone. But the conversation with Myrta had changed the calculation. Whatever was behind that door was no longer just Adelaide Granger's private space. It was the only map of the territory Willa was walking into blind. She turned the handle. The room was small, barely larger than a generous closet, with a single window looking out toward the barn and a wooden desk made by someone who understood that a working desk needed to be solid. The surface was worn pale at the center where hands had rested over years of concentrated work. A pen stand positioned to the left, a small clay bowl in one corner that had held something once and been emptied and not replaced. She stood in the doorway and let herself understand what she was looking at. Adelaide Granger had sat in this room, had organized the financial life of a 1,200-acre cattle operation from this desk, had tracked every dollar and every arrangement and every agreement, had done it well enough that the ranch was still standing 16 months after she stopped. The room held the shape of a person who was no longer in it. Willa had learned, after Edmund died, that rooms did this. They kept the impression of their people longer than you expected. She sat down in the chair carefully. It fit her differently than it would have fit Adelaide, who from the evidence of the clothing in the upstairs wardrobe had been considerably smaller. But the chair was solid and the desk was the right height, and the lamp threw good light when she lit it. The account books were in the middle drawer, 3 of them. Identical ledgers with dates written on the spines in a small, indeed precise hand that slanted to the right. She opened the most recent one. Adelaide Granger had been meticulous, not just accurate, but meticulous in the manner of someone who understood that numbers told a story and that the story mattered. Every entry was clear, every column balanced, and in the margins, written small in the same precise slanting hand, notes that went beyond the numbers. Taggart always undercounts the spring calf weight at loading. Verify at scale before signing. The Aldi's grazing arrangement renews in August. Colt will forget. Noted in June. And then, on a page near the back of the second ledger, something that made Willa go very still. Voss. First Territorial. The spoken terms and the written terms are not the same document. Never trust what he says across the desk. Read everything. Read the small print twice. She read it again. Adelaide had known, had sat in this chair and understood exactly what Harlan Voss was doing, and had written it down as a warning that had survived her by 16 months and been waiting here for whoever came next. Willa read for 2 hours. She took her own notes on a separate sheet of paper, working through what was current and what had been allowed to slip. The ranch was generating enough from cattle sales to cover basic operating costs, but there were arrangements Adelaide had maintained with neighboring ranchers that had gone quiet because no one had followed up. And there was the Voss loan, sitting in the middle of the financial picture like a stone in the center of a stream, everything else having to route around it. She was still at the desk when she heard Colt's boots on the porch steps, heavier on the left foot than the right from some old strain he had never mentioned. She heard him come through the front door and stop in the hallway, and then walk toward the light coming from under the study door. He knocked once, and she said, "Come in," and he stood in the doorway, looking at the open ledger and the lamp and the notes she had been making. Something moved through his face. Not the quick, managed reaction she had come to expect from him. This was slower. He was looking at the desk and at Adelaide's handwriting visible in the margins, and he did not try to make his face do anything in particular. She waited. He came in and sat down in the single chair across from the desk with the particular care of someone who is not sure they have the right to be comfortable in a space that used to belong to someone else. "Find anything useful?" he said. His voice was level, but the level was costing something. "Quite a lot that is useful." She turned the ledger so he could see what she had been looking at. "There is a grazing arrangement with a rancher to your east, an Aldous." His expression shifted. "I let that lapse. I forgot to renew it last August. Is it an arrangement you would want to continue?" "Yes. Good land, and he gets fair use of the North Creek in August when his own water runs low." "Write him a letter this week," Willa said. "Late is better than not at all." He nodded slowly. She would have sent it the same week the calendar turned. She would have. Willa said. She paused. She was good at this. She was better at this than I ever was. He said it as a plain fact, without self-pity. I knew cattle, and I knew land. She knew everything else. He looked at the margins of the open ledger. I tried to open this drawer once. About 2 months after. He stopped. I opened it, and I looked at her writing, and I put it all back, and I did not open it again. "I know," Willa said. "How do you know?" The dust on the drawer pull was undisturbed. Everything in this room has been sitting exactly where she left it. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the pen stand and the empty clay bowl and the small things still positioned by hands that were no longer here to move them. "That is not a failing," she said. "That is just how long some things take." He looked at her then with the focused attention of someone trying to understand something they have not been able to get at from any other direction. "She would have liked you," he said. Willa held that for a moment. Then she said, "That means something. Thank you." He nodded, looked at her notes. "Walk me through what needs doing." So she did. They sat in the small room for another hour, going through what she had found, and he answered her questions and added things she had not known, and between the two of them they built a picture of where the ranch stood and what needed to happen in what order. He knew things she did not about the land and the cattle and the people they dealt with. She knew things he did not about the accounts and the arrangements and the warning his wife had left written in the margins. Between them, they had most of what they needed. When they were done, he sat back and looked at her with an expression she had not seen from him before, not the tiredness, not the careful guardedness that had been his default, something cleaner than those things. "I have been carrying this in my head alone for 16 months, when he said. It is different when someone else knows it." "Yes," she said, "it is." She found the problem with the Voss loan on a Thursday, 8 days after the night in Adelaide's study. She had gone back to the account books twice more on her own, working through the earlier ledgers, and she had pulled out the loan document itself from the folder at the back of the bottom drawer, where Adelaide had filed it with a small notation on the tab that said Voss. First Territorial. Read everything. She read everything. The loan was for $4,200 at a rate that was reasonable on its face, but folded into the document in the third section, in language that required reading twice and then a third time before the full meaning became clear, was the clause Myrta had described. The lender reserves the right to accelerate the full outstanding balance in the event that the secured property is determined by the lender to be insufficiently maintained or managed, with such determination to be made at the lender's sole discretion following written notification to the borrower, at the lender's sole discretion. She sat with that. But below it, 3 paragraphs further, in language that was smaller and denser and had clearly been written by someone who hoped it would not be read carefully, was something else. The borrower may contest any acceleration notice by presenting to the relevant court a documented record of the property's management and financial condition at the time of the notice, provided such documentation demonstrates that the property was being actively and competently managed at said time. At said time, not over the past 16 months. At the time the notice was issued, she set the document down and thought about what she had walked into 3 weeks ago, and what the ranch looked like now compared to then, and what it would be possible to demonstrate to a court if it came to that. Then she went back and looked at the margins of the account book and found the entry she had noticed and passed over the first night, near the bottom of a page in the third ledger. The writing was slightly less precise than the rest, written faster, or at a time when the hand holding the pen had not been entirely steady. Everything I have built here is in the books. If I am not here to explain it, the books will have to do it. They are complete enough. Someone who knows how to read them will be able to understand. I hope that person finds them. Willa sat in Adelaide's chair in the small room and read that 3 times. Then she went back to work. The letter from Harlan Voss arrived on a Friday morning. She opened it at the kitchen table, with Colt standing across from her, and read it through once without speaking. Voss was activating the acceleration clause. His stated grounds were that the ranch had been demonstrably mismanaged over the preceding period, citing the children's extended absence from school, the visible deterioration of the main house exterior, and what he described as the lack of consistent professional management of the property's financial affairs. Every piece of evidence he cited was from before she arrived. The full balance of $4,200 plus accrued penalty interest was due in 15 days. Failure to pay in full would result in a foreclosure petition filed with the territorial court. She set the letter down. Colt was looking at her and not at the letter. He knew. She said, "He has been watching this ranch since February of last year," Colt said. "Since about a month after. 15 days, he said. "We cannot pay it." She looked at him steadily. "But we do not have to pay it if we can demonstrate to a court that the ranch is being competently managed at the time he issued the notice." He went still. "That is in the contract. It is in the contract." Adelaide found it and left it noted. "The question is whether we can put together documentation in 15 days that a judge will accept." "What kind of documentation?" "The account books, the land registration, the school attendance records from when I got the children back in, a record of what this house looked like when I arrived and what it looks like now, and witnesses who can speak to what they have seen." He was quiet. "People in this town are afraid of Voss. Some of them," she said. "Not all of them." She went to town the next morning. Myrta listened to all of it, with her hands flat on the counter, and her expression doing nothing in particular, which was a different thing from her expression doing nothing. When Willa finished, Myrta said, "You need to go to Albuquerque." Willa looked at her. "There is a federal judge doing circuit work through the territory this month. Ida Kress. She takes cases the local courts would rather not touch. Voss has the hatchet judge in this district. Everyone knows it. If you file here, you will lose before you start." She met Willa's eyes. "Kress is different. She will actually read the documents. How long is the ride to Albuquerque?" "By stage. 3 days there, 3 back. You have 15 days. 9 left after I return." Myrta nodded. "That is tight." Willa thought about the account books and Adelaide's margin notes and the contest clause in Section 3 and what could be assembled in 9 days by someone who knew what she was looking for. "I can do 9 days," she said. She went back to the ranch and told Colt what she needed. He listened without interrupting. "You would go alone," he said when she finished. "You cannot leave the ranch and the children for 6 days. And I know the documents better than you do." He could not argue with either part of that. "Take the bay mare," he said finally. "She is steadier for long travel." and there is a boarding house at the stage stop in Mora. Tell them Walt Granger's daughter sent you, and they will not overcharge you." She almost asked who Walt Granger was and decided the story could wait for another time. She left the following morning at first light. Colt was already in the barn. He had the mare saddled and the saddlebag packed with enough food for 2 days and a folded oilskin in case the weather came in. He handed her the reins and did not say anything for a moment. "The account books," he said. "Are you taking them?" "Copies. I made copies of the relevant pages last night. The originals stay here." He nodded. She put her foot in the stirrup and swung up and settled her weight, and the mare shifted once and steadied. She looked down at him in the early morning light. "Nell needs her milk warmed before you give it to her, or she will not take it," she said. "Delia knows how. Seth will do the kindling without being asked if you leave the wood box low the night before. Bart needs a task with a clear completion, or he will invent his own, and it will not be useful. Corny will tell you what everyone else is thinking, whether or not you want to know it. And Blythe," he was looking up at her, "Blythe just needs to know where you are," she said. "Tell her where you are going before you go." He pressed his lips together once. "I will." She turned the mare and rode out. The road to Albuquerque was long and dry and passed through country that did not apologize for being difficult. She rode the first day hard and made the stage connection at Mora and spent the night in the boarding house where the mention of Walt Granger's name produced a clean room and a decent supper without discussion. She was in Albuquerque by the evening of the third day, dusty and stiff and carrying a saddlebag full of carefully copied documents. The federal court office was a 2-story adobe building on the plaza with a territorial flag above the door and a clerk at a desk who looked up when she came in and looked at her the way people looked at her when they were calculating something about her that had nothing to do with why she was there. She set the copies of Adelaide's account books on the desk. She set the loan document beside them with the relevant clauses marked. She set the biennial land registration receipt on top. "I need to request an emergency hearing before Judge Kress," she said. "I have a foreclosure action being brought against a ranch in Clearwater Bend under a loan agreement that contains a fraudulent acceleration clause. I have documentation demonstrating that the property is being competently managed at the time the notice was issued. I have 12 days. The clerk looked at the documents, looked at her, looked at the documents again. "Judge Kress is in court until 4, he said. "I will wait," she said, full, and sat down. She waited 3 hours. She went through her copies twice more while she waited, making sure she could speak to every number and every margin note and every piece of what Adelaide had built and left behind. At 4:10, a door at the back opened and a woman came out who was somewhere in her late 50s, compact and direct, with gray hair pinned back with no particular concern for appearance, and the expression of someone who had spent decades in rooms where people tried to say one thing while meaning another and had long since stopped being patient about it. Ida Kress looked at Willa, looked at the stack of documents. "Come in," she said. "You have 20 minutes. Willa had her in 10. She laid out the situation clearly and without embellishment. The loan and the fraudulent clause and Adelaide's documented warning and the acceleration notice issued on evidence that predated Willa's arrival by 3 weeks. She put the copies on the judge's desk in order and let them speak. Judge Kress read without speaking. She read the way people read when they are actually paying attention, which is differently from how people read when they are looking for what they expect to find. She went back twice to Adelaide's margin note. She looked at the acceleration notice and the dates. She set everything down and looked at Willa. "Who prepared these copies?" "I did. The originals are at the ranch. Are you the wife?" "I am the housekeeper. I may also be the wife." She paused. "That part is still being decided." The corner of Judge Kress's mouth moved very slightly. "I will be in Clearwater Bend in 11 days, she said. "Bring the originals. Bring your witnesses. And tell whoever is running that ranch not to let anyone onto the property to conduct any assessment until I have seen the documents in person." Willa rode back in 3 days. Colt was in the yard when she came through the gate, working on a piece of fencing, and he looked up when he heard the mare and went still in the manner of someone who has been not quite admitting they were worried about something and is now watching it come back into view. She dismounted and reached into the saddlebag and produced the folded note with Judge Cress's name at the top. He read it. He read it twice. 11 days, he said. 9 now. I need to wash, and then we need to talk about witnesses. He stood in the yard, holding the note, and she took the mare to the barn and unsaddled her and gave her water and thought about what 9 days of preparation looked like. When she came back out, he was still standing in the same place. She would have done this herself, he said. Adelaide, if it had come to this. She did prepare for it, Willa said. She just ran out of time. He folded the note and put it in his shirt pocket, close to where his heart was, which she thought he probably did not notice he was doing. She went inside. Seth was at the kitchen table with a book open and looked up when she came in, and something in his face shifted in a way she did not try to name. "You came back," he said. "I said I would." He looked at her for a moment with the measuring assessment that was his particular way of deciding whether something was true. Then he looked back at his book. "Bart burned the cornbread last night," he said. "Just so you know." She hung up her coat and rolled up her sleeves. "I will make more," she said. The 9 days moved the way days move when you have too much to do and not enough hours to do it. Fast and without ceremony and leaving no room for anything except the work. Willa organized the preparation by breaking it into its component parts and addressing each one in order. The account books needed to be cross-referenced against the acceleration notice, so she could demonstrate line by line that every piece of evidence Voss had cited was dated before her arrival. The land registration documents needed to be pulled and copied. The school attendance records from the Clearwater Bend schoolhouse required a separate trip to town and a conversation with the schoolteacher, a thin, precise woman named Mrs. Aldershot, who had been watching the Granger children return to her classroom with the look of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of request and was glad to provide it. Myrta Sutton came to the ranch on the 5th day with 2 other women, a rancher's wife named Dora Fisk, who lived 6 miles south and had been watching the Granger place since before Adelaide died, and a woman named Constance Waverly, who ran the feed store and had sold Colt supplies for 11 years and had kept, as it turned out, a personal ledger of her own transactions with the ranch, because that was simply how Constance Waverly operated. They sat at the kitchen table, and Willa explained what she needed from each of them. Not testimony about Harlan Voss, testimony about what they had seen, what the ranch had looked like before she arrived and what it looked like now. Facts that could be observed and stated plainly. Dora Fisk said she would have come sooner if she had known someone was going to ask. Constance Waverly said she had been waiting 11 years for someone to do something about that loan clause, and she was not going to miss the opportunity. Myrta said nothing, but the way she sat at the table communicated everything necessary. On the 7th day, Seth came to find her in the study. She was working through the copied documents for the 4th time when he appeared in the doorway holding something with the particular care he gave to books he was not sure whether to lend, carefully, at a slight angle, as if ready to take it back. It was a journal, slim, leather-covered, the pages swollen slightly from age and handling. "I found it on her shelf," he said. He meant Adelaide's shelf, the one in the study she had not disturbed. "I thought it might be." He stopped. "I marked the pages." She took it from him. He had marked 3 places with strips of paper torn from the margin of something else. The first marked page had a paragraph about the North Section land, written in Adelaide's hand with more personal weight behind it than the account books. She had described the water rights, the seasonal creek flow, the particular value of that land in August when every other water source in the area was running low. She had written, "This land is worth more than the loan against it. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." The second marked page was a record of 2 conversations Adelaide had written down shortly after they happened. Both were conversations with Harlan Voss. The dates were there. The substance was there. The way he had described the loan terms verbally was there, alongside the notation. "This is not what the document says. I have read the document." The third marked page was near the very end of the journal, in handwriting that was slightly less precise than the rest, written in the manner of someone setting something down carefully because they may not have much time to set it down. Tucked inside the back cover, pressed flat between the final page and the leather, was a small envelope, unsealed, addressed in the same slanting hand to no one by name, only a description written where the name would go. "For whoever sits in this chair next." Willa looked at it for a moment, then she opened it. The letter inside was not long. It described the Voss loan in plain terms, the verbal promises and the written reality, the contest clause buried in Section 3 that Adelaide had found and noted and intended to use if it ever came to that. It described the North Section land and why it mattered, the water rights and the August Creek flow, and what the ranch would be without it. And then, at the bottom, in the same careful hand, a final line. "The ranch is worth fighting for. The children are worth more. Whoever you are, thank you for staying." Willa sat in Adelaide's chair in the small room and read that twice. Then she set the letter down on the desk and looked at the lamp for a long moment. Seth was still in the doorway. "This is important," she said. He nodded as if he had known that before he brought it. She looked at this 11-year-old boy who had been reading his mother's journal alone, who had marked the pages and carried the book down the hall and held it out with the care of someone offering something they understood mattered. "Thank you," she said. "That is all. Just that." He looked at the floor. Then he looked up. "Is it enough to win?" She considered him and gave him the truth. "I think so, but I will not know for certain until we are in that room." He nodded, turned, went back down the hall, and she heard his door close with the careful quiet of someone who does not want to disturb anything. She went back to the documents. The storm that had been building came in 2 nights before the hearing, not the gradual kind that announces itself for hours, but the sudden kind that arrives with full intention. She heard the first crack of thunder past midnight, and then the rain on the roof, and the wind finding every gap in the window frames. Nell woke first, which she heard through the ceiling, and she was already in the hall when Colt's door opened. They stood in the hallway, looking at each other in the dark. "Go back to sleep," she said. "I have Nell." He went anyway. She took Nell, and he checked on Blythe and Corny, and Bart slept through everything, because Bart slept through everything. And Seth's light was already on under the door. She walked the hall with Nell against her shoulder while the rain came down. Nell stopped crying after a few minutes and pressed her face into Willa's collar and breathed in the damp and warm manner of a child being held by someone she has decided to trust. Colt found her in the kitchen sometime after 2 in the morning, sitting with Nell finally sleeping against her chest and the hearing document spread on the table in front of her. He sat down across from her without saying anything. The storm pressed against the windows and the lamp threw its circle of amber, and outside that circle everything was dark and loud, and inside it everything was quiet. "You have been through all of those 4 times," he said. "5, she said. "I know them." "Then stop looking at them." She looked at him. He was right, and she knew it, and she did not like it, which was how she could tell it was true. She stacked the documents and set them aside. "What are you afraid of?" he said. She gave the question the weight it deserved. "That I have built something here that can be taken from the outside, she said. "That Voss gets to stand in front of a judge and say she is just the housekeeper, and the judge agrees with him." He was quiet for a moment. "You are not just the housekeeper," he said. "You have not been just the housekeeper since the second week. I know what I am," she said. "The question is what a judge decides. Judge Cress will read the documents." "You said that yourself. You said she reads things rather than looking for what she expects to find." "I did say that." "Then trust what you said." She looked at him across the kitchen table in the storm-dark early morning with Nell sleeping against her chest. "I am going to make a case in that courtroom based on Adelaide's work," she said. "Her books, her margin notes, her journal, her letter. Everything I know about this ranch I learned from what she left behind. Whatever happens, that part is true." He reached out and placed 2 fingers on the edge of the top ledger. Not picking it up, just touching it the way you touch something that belongs to someone who is no longer there. "She would want you to use it," he said. "She left it there to be used." They sat with that while the storm ran its course. The rain tapered to nothing somewhere past 3, and the silence that followed was the particular silence of a world still taking stock of what had just moved through it. She put Nell back in her bed and slept for 3 hours. The morning of the hearing was clear and cold, the air washed clean by the storm. The mountains to the west showing white all the way down past where they usually carried snow in late spring. Willa dressed carefully, not in anything that was trying to be something other than what she was, but in the cleanest and most deliberate version of herself. Her good wool skirt and her navy broadcloth jacket and her boots polished the night before. Her hair pinned back with the pins her mother had given her, plain but solid. She looked in the small mirror above the washstand and looked at herself the way she had learned to look at things she needed to assess accurately. She looked like a woman who had ridden 3 days to Albuquerque alone with a saddlebag full of documents and built a legal argument on the foundation of a dead woman's meticulous record-keeping, and was prepared to stand in front of a federal judge and explain all of it clearly. That was what she was. That would have to be enough. Colt had the wagon ready when she came out. The children were on the porch in their school clothes, which they had decided among themselves, because she had not asked it of them. Delia stood very straight. Seth had his hands in his pockets. Bart was managing his expression with the visible effort of someone who had decided this was a serious occasion. Corny had her arm linked through Delia's. Blythe stood at the edge of the porch with Nell balanced on her hip, optimistic given that Blythe was 7 and Nell had recently developed opinions about being held. But Nell was cooperating. Willa looked at all of them. "You do not have to come," she said. Delia said, "We know." None of them moved. She nodded once and climbed onto the wagon bench, and Colt took up the reins, and the children sorted themselves into the wagon bed, and they drove into Clearwater Bend in the clear, cold morning with the mountains at their backs. Harlan Voss was already in the courtroom when they arrived. He had brought a lawyer from Santa Fe, a thin man with a briefcase that had more brass fittings than was strictly necessary, and 2 other men whose purpose seemed to be occupying space in a way that suggested importance. Voss himself was in his best suit and wore the expression of a man who has done this before and found it go his way and has no particular reason to expect otherwise. He looked at Willa when she came in, just a slight adjustment around the eyes, the recalculation of someone who was not expecting her to look the way she looked, which was to say, prepared and unafraid, and carrying a leather satchel clearly full of things she intended to use. Judge Ida Cress came in at exactly 9 o'clock, and the room stood, and she told them to sit and sat down herself and looked at both tables with the expression of someone who intended to get to the truth of the matter and was not going to be patient about detours. Voss's lawyer presented first. He was smooth in the manner of lawyers who have practiced being smooth, with a voice calibrated to sound both reasonable and inevitable. The loan had been issued in good faith. The terms were clear. The ranch had been demonstrably in a state of neglect sufficient to constitute mismanagement under Section 4. He presented a document he described as an independent assessment of the property conducted the previous fall. He did not mention when the assessment had been conducted relative to when the acceleration notice had been issued. Judge Kress noticed. "When was this assessment conducted?" She said, "November of last year." The lawyer said. "And when was the acceleration notice issued?" "March of this year." The judge looked at the document for a long time. Then she set it down and looked at Willa. "Your response," she said. Willa stood. The courtroom was not large. The benches behind the bar held Myrta Sutton and Dora Fisk and Constance Waverly and the children and Colt. It held a dozen other people from Clearwater Bend who had come because that was what people did when something was happening in a small place. She set the satchel on the table and took out the account books first. She placed them on the bar in front of Judge Kress in order, the spines visible, Adelaide's dates written on each one. "These are the financial records of the Granger Ranch kept by the previous Mrs. Granger," she said. "They are complete from the establishment of the ranch to the date of Mrs. Granger's death 16 months ago." She placed the copies of the relevant pages beside them. "I have prepared copies of the pages pertaining to the Voss loan and to the financial condition of the ranch at various dates." Judge Kress picked up the most recent ledger and opened it. Willa set the loan document on the bar and opened it to the section she had marked. Section 3 of the loan agreement contains an acceleration clause. Section 3, subsection 2, contains a contest provision that allows the borrower to challenge any acceleration notice by presenting documented evidence that the property was being actively and competently managed at the time the notice was issued. She let that settle. The acceleration notice was issued on March 14th of this year. I arrived at the Granger Ranch on April 2nd of this year. The notice was issued before I arrived. She placed the school attendance records and dated. She placed the receipts from Sutton's General Store. She placed the biennial land registration from the Territorial Land Office for the North Section. Then she placed Adelaide's journal, open to the second marked page, and beside it, smoothed flat, the small unsealed envelope with its address written where a name would go. "This is a personal record kept by Adelaide Granger," she said. "It contains entries describing 2 conversations she had with Harlan Voss, in which the terms he described verbally were materially different from the terms written in the document he subsequently presented for signature. The dates of those conversations are recorded. The substance is recorded. Mrs. Granger noted the discrepancy at the time. And this," she said, touching the envelope, "is a letter Mrs. Granger left for whoever came after her. She did not know who that person would be. She left it anyway." The room was quiet. Voss's lawyer started to say something. Judge Kress held up one hand without looking at him and kept reading. She read for a long time. She went back to the account books twice. She read Adelaide's journal entries about the Voss conversations. She read the letter slowly, to the end, and then she set it down on the bar and looked at it for a moment before she looked up. She said, "I am going to hear from 3 witnesses." Myrta Sutton spoke first. She described what the Granger Ranch had looked like before Willa arrived, which she knew because she had sold supplies to Adelaide Granger for 11 years and had watched the place from the road in the months after Adelaide died. She described what it looked like now. She used plain language and did not editorialize. Dora Fisk described the same from the vantage of a neighbor 6 miles south who had watched the smoke from the Granger chimney most mornings and could tell from its pattern whether the stove was being properly maintained. Constance Waverly produced her personal ledger of transactions with the ranch and walked through the pattern of supply purchases over the past 3 months, which showed a marked increase in the regularity and practicality of what was being bought. Then Delia Granger stood up. She was 13 years old, and she stood straight and without apology. She did not look at Voss. She looked at Judge Cress. "I want to say something," she said. Judge Cress looked at her. "Go ahead." "My father did not abandon this ranch," Delia said. "He did not abandon us." She said it the way she said things that had been true for a long time and were only now being said out loud. "He was lost for a while after our mother died. That is different from abandoning. Lost is something you can come back from." She paused. "He came back, and Miss Bassett is the reason he had something to come back to." The courtroom was quiet. Judge Cress looked at Delia for a moment. Then she looked at the documents on the bar in front of her, and she looked at Harlan Voss and his lawyer with the expression of someone who has seen enough to know exactly what she is looking at. She said, "The acceleration notice issued by the plaintiff on March 14th of this year was based entirely on an assessment conducted in November of the preceding year. The contest provision in Section 3, subsection 2 of the loan agreement is clear. The relevant question is the condition of the property at the time the notice was issued, not 4 months prior to it. The documented record presented by Miss Bassett demonstrates that the Granger Ranch was being actively and competently managed at the time the notice was issued. The acceleration notice is therefore invalid under the terms of the loan agreement itself." She looked at Voss. "I am further referring the original loan document to the Territorial Attorney's Office for review of the discrepancy between the verbal terms described in Mrs. Adelaide Granger's contemporaneous journal entries and the written terms of the executed agreement. That review will determine whether further action is warranted." She picked up her pen. "The foreclosure petition is denied." The room breathed out. Willis stood at the table and looked at the stack of documents and the 3 account books and Adelaide's journal and the small, unsealed envelope beside it, its address still legible. "For whoever sits in this chair next." She thought about a woman she had never met who had understood that what you build does not have to stop mattering when you stop being there to tend it. Who had prepared for the possibility of her own absence with the same precision she brought to everything else, and had left a letter for a stranger she would never know, trusting that the right stranger would eventually find it. She closed the journal carefully and put it back in the satchel. Outside the courtroom, the children were around her before she was fully through the door. Bart wrapped both arms around her waist with the unself-conscious physicality of a 9-year-old who has decided something is worth celebrating. Corny was making a sound somewhere between a cheer and a shout. Delia stood slightly apart with her hands open at her sides, not the old braced posture of someone ready to catch whatever fell next, but open, like a person who has recently put something heavy down and is still surprised by how light her hands feel. Seth stood in front of her. He looked at her for a moment. "You did it," he said. "Adelaide did most of it," she said. "I just finished what she started." He considered this. Then he said, "You are both the same kind of person." She looked at this 11-year-old boy who had read his mother's journal alone, who had marked the pages and carried it down the hall because he understood they were necessary, who had looked at the satchel she was holding now and known before anyone else what was in it that mattered. "Yes," she said, "I think that might be true." Blythe took her hand, not both hands the way she had on the porch that first evening, just one hand, a single grip, the comfortable grip of a child who no longer needs to hold on with everything she has because she is no longer afraid of being let go. Colt was standing a few feet away with his hands in his coat pockets and his face doing the thing it did when he had more in him than he had language for, which with Colt Granger covered a considerable amount of territory. She walked toward him. He said, "I need to tell you something." She waited. He took one hand out of his pocket, and he was holding something small. A bird, carved from pale wood. Cottonwood, she thought, from the grain of it. Small enough to sit in her palm. The wings were lifted at an angle that was not quite flight, but the moment just before, that poised second of decision. "You made this," she said. "I used to carve before." He turned it once in his hand. "I found the knife a few weeks back. I have been working on it in the evenings." She took it from him and turned it over. The grain of the wood ran through the lifted wings like water finding its way through stone. It was rough in the places where handmade things are rough and careful in the places where care had been given. "Willa," he said. She looked up at him. He said, "I am not good at saying things in the right order or the right way." She nodded because she knew this from experience. "I got you here with a letter that was not honest, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. And you stayed and you did what you did, and I know you did it because of the children, and because of the ranch, and because of the kind of person you are." He stopped. "But I am asking you to stay for a reason that is yours and not anyone else's, for what you want." She looked at the bird in her hands. "What are you asking me?" she said. He said, "I think you know. Say it anyway." He looked at her directly with those honest gray eyes she had noticed on the first day and never quite gotten comfortable with. "Marry me," he said. "Not because the ranch needs it and not because the children need it, though they do. Because I want you to have a reason that belongs only to you." The street of Clearwater Bend was bright in the spring light around them, and the children were a few feet away, not quite pretending not to listen, and Myrta Sutton was visible through the window of her store, doing the same thing with considerably less effort at concealment. "Ask me in the morning," Willa said, "when it is not right after something large and we are both still finding our feet." He held her gaze for a moment. "All right," he said. She kept the bird. She held it that night while she sat with the account books one last time, not to work from them, but simply to sit with them, the way you sit with something that has been in close company long enough that putting it away requires acknowledgement. 3 ledgers begun, 11 years of a woman's careful attention to the life she had built. She closed the last one and put all 3 back in the drawer of Adelaide's desk. She put Adelaide's journal on the shelf beside the surveying tools, which was where she thought it belonged. She put the small, unsealed envelope in the center of the desk surface, where anyone sitting in that chair would see it. It seemed right to leave it there. It had found its person. Now it could simply be what it was. She turned off the lamp and went to bed, and in the morning she woke before anyone else, same as always, and dressed in the gray before dawn light, and went downstairs and stood in the kitchen doorway looking at the room. The floor was clean, the counter was clear, the tablecloth was on the table, faded and burned at one corner, and the stove was drawing properly. And through the window the sky was moving from dark to the pale gold that came before the sun fully arrived. She put the coffee on. Colt came down while it was still early, before the children, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her, and she looked at him. "Yes," she said, "in the morning light, not after something large, not when we are still finding our feet. Yes." He did not say anything for a moment. He looked at her with the relief and the weight of someone who has been handed something he understands is breakable and intends to be careful with. Then he poured himself a cup of coffee and stood at the window looking out at the barn, and she made biscuits and the house began its morning sounds around them. Nell waking, Bart's feet on the stairs, the particular crack of the 3rd step from the top. They did not tell the children right away because the morning moved the way mornings move and there was no clean moment. Nell needed her milk. Bart came down already talking. Seth appeared with a book already open. Corny sat down and looked at the table and then looked at both of them with the precision of a 7-year-old who notices things and said, "Something is different this morning." Colt set down his cup and looked at Willa, and she gave him a slight nod. "Miss Bassett has agreed to marry me," he said, simply, without preamble. "That is what is different." The kitchen was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then Bart made a sound that was not quite a word and pumped his fist in the air. Corny grabbed Delia's arm with both hands. Delia stood very still with her face doing things she was not trying to control and her hands open at her sides. Seth was looking at his father and then at Willa, and something in his measuring expression was arriving at an answer he appeared to find satisfactory. Blythe climbed down from her chair and walked across the kitchen with the deliberate dignity of a small person who has made a decision and intends to follow through, and put both arms around Willa's waist and held on without saying anything. She held on for a long time. Then she let go, went back to her chair, and picked up her biscuit and ate it. Seth said, "Does this mean she stays?" "Yes," Colt said. "That is what it means." Seth looked at Willa. "Good," he said. The way he said things that mattered as if they did not, because he had learned that was the safest way to say them. "Good," she said back. They were married 6 weeks later on a Saturday in late May in the yard of the ranch, because it was the largest space available, and Colt had not wanted to do it in the Clearwater Bend Church, on the grounds that the minister there talked past the point of anything being useful. Judge Kress, who was still doing circuit work through the territory, and had apparently decided that the resolution of the Granger matter was something she would like to see the conclusion of, performed the ceremony herself with the minimum of words and the maximum of intention. It was not a graceful occasion. The table Murda Sutton's boy set up listed badly, and they caught it after a pitcher of lemonade had already gone sideways. Bart got into something with the Aldi's boy from the neighboring ranch and had to be redirected with the calm authority of someone who had expected this. Corny attached herself to Dora Fisk and followed her for 2 hours asking questions about cattle medicine, which Dora Fisk appeared to find entirely reasonable. Seth spent most of the afternoon at the edge of things, in the manner he always was in gatherings. With a book in his back pocket he kept touching. But halfway through the afternoon, Willa looked over and he was talking to the Aldous boy, apparently having reached some independent resolution with him, standing with the focused intensity of two people who have discovered they share something unexpected. Delia moved through everything with the ease of a person who had been carrying things for other people her whole life and had recently put some of it down and discovered her hands were capable of other things. She refilled what needed refilling and redirected Bart when necessary, and at one point sat down next to Blythe under the old cottonwood at the edge of the yard, and they stayed there a while talking in the quiet way of sisters who have more history between them than they have words for. Nell was passed from person to person with the diplomacy of a 15-month-old who has strong opinions, but has decided this occasion calls for flexibility. She ended up on Colt's hip for the last hour, her dark hair against his shirt, and he walked through the gathering with her there, with the ease of someone who had gotten better at something without quite noticing when it happened. When the last of the neighbors had gone and the yard was empty, except for the family and the long light of late afternoon coming down through the cottonwoods, Willa stood at the edge of the garden she had planted in April and looked at what had come up. The beans were climbing their strings, the corn was knee-high, the tomatoes were setting fruit. She had planted it, not knowing whether she would be there to see it. Colt came to stand beside her. He reached into his coat pocket and brought out a paper envelope, small and folded. He held it out. She took it. Inside were bulbs, 6 of them, brown and paper dry. "Tulips," he said. He had mentioned it once, weeks ago, in passing, the garden her mother had kept in Ohio. She had not thought he was listening. He had been listening. "They will not come up until spring." She held the envelope and looked at it and did not say anything for a moment. "That is a long time to wait," she said. "I have been planting things on this land for 11 years, he said. "I know how to wait for spring." She looked at the garden and then at the house and then at the mountains to the west with the last of the day's light on them. And she thought about a woman she had never met who had left a letter for a stranger and trusted that the right stranger would find it. She thought about a chair that fit a person differently depending on who was sitting in it, but was solid enough to hold either one. She thought about an advertisement in a newspaper and what she had understood it to mean, and what she knew it meant now. "Help me plant them," she said. So they knelt in the garden together in the late May afternoon and pressed the bulbs into the ground one after another, and their hands worked close together without commentary, finding the rhythm of it. Nell sat a few feet away, pulling at a clump of grass with the concentrated effort of someone who has decided this is her work. Seth had come out of the house and was sitting on the porch steps, reading. Blythe was somewhere inside. She could hear her talking to Corny in the particular back and forth of those two. Delia came and stood at the edge of the garden. She held out an envelope. It was sealed and addressed and ready, written in Delia's careful hand. The address at the top was a school in Santa Fe. "I finished it this morning," Delia said. She was not showing it to Willa for approval. She was showing it the way you show someone something you have decided about on your own and want them to know. Willa looked at the envelope, at Delia's handwriting, at the address. Then she looked at Delia. "Then mail it," she said. Delia nodded. She went back inside, and a moment later Willa heard the front door open and close, and she knew without looking that Delia had gone to find someone to take it to town. Willa pressed the last bulb into the ground and sat back on her heels and looked at the row of disturbed earth. Nothing visible. Nothing yet. Just the possibility of something held in the dark under the surface, waiting for a season that was months away and as certain as anything in this uncertain country. She had come here with one bag and $11.20, and a letter that told her the household was orderly, which was the furthest thing from the truth she had ever traveled toward on the strength of. She had found a house that smelled like 16 months of giving up, and a man who could not finish sentences that required him to say what he actually meant, and 5 children in 5 different corners of the same grief, and a set of account books in a closed drawer that a dead woman had kept with the precision of someone who understood that what you build does not have to stop mattering when you stop being there to tend it. She had found, in all of that, something she had stopped expecting to find. Not the orderly household from the advertisement. Something underneath that, the thing that makes a place feel like it belongs to you and you to it. The particular knowledge of a house's sounds at night and the way the light comes through a specific window in the morning, and where a child will be when she is quiet, and what a man's face does when he has more in him than he has language for. She brushed the dirt from her hands and stood. Colt stood beside her, and they looked together at what they had planted, at the turned earth and what was underneath it that neither of them could see yet, and the spring that was months away and had no intention of not arriving. She went inside. Behind her, the garden held its bulbs in the dark ground, and the house held its people in the warm light, and the door closed, and the evening came down off the mountains, the way it always did, slow and gold and without apology, painting everything the color of something that had decided to stay.